All right, next up, we're going to focus on platelets and blood clotting. Platelets. Platelets are sometimes known as thrombocytes. They result from the fragmentation of large cells called megakaryocytes, which are found in the red bone marrow. They're not considered true cells. Like I said, they're basically cell fragments. There are about 2 billion platelets that are made every single day, and their function is going to be primarily in blood clotting or coagulation. Plasma proteins prothrombin and fibrinogen are also involved in blood clotting, and vitamin K is going to be necessary for the formation of prothrombin, so vitamin K also is very important to the process of blood clotting. Blood clotting is a very interesting and unique process. It's important so that plasma and formed elements don't leak out of broken blood vessels. There are 13 different clotting factors, things like calcium ions and enzymes that participate in clot formation. So when a vessel breaks, platelets are going to clump up to partially seal it. Platelets in injured tissues are going to release clotting factors called prothrombin activator, which will convert prothrombin to thrombin. That conversion to thrombin is going to require calcium ions. Thrombin will act as an enzyme that's going to convert the plasma protein fibrinogen to fibrin. Remember when we talked about fibrinogen and how it's going to need to be activated? In its inactivated form, it can pass through the blood vessels very easily, but once it's activated, it's going to start to form that mesh sort of network that's going to help form clots. So the fibrin clot that forms is going to be very temporary. It's temporary. An enzyme called plasmin is going to eventually destroy that fibrin network, so that way tissue cells can grow to repair the vessel. So what we're going to do, it's just like putting just like putting a Band-Aid on. We're just going to temporarily stop the bleeding, so that way we can eventually heal that up with some new cells. So once the tissues, the fibrin clot will eventually dissolve with the plasmin and to destroy that fibrin network, so that way the tissues can grow to repair those vessels. Then a serum is going to escape from the clot. This contains all the components of plasma except for the fibrinogen and prothrombin. So here is just what that sort of looks like, the formation of the blood clot. We have our fibrin threads, and then we've got our red blood cells. And you can see how the formation of these fibrin threads can actually prevent the movement of those red blood cells from escaping. So we're going to form sort of this mesh network on the outside of that vessel to prevent any more red blood cells from escaping. There are a couple of disorders that are related to blood clotting. For example, thrombocytopenia. This is when we have too few platelets. This is usually due to not being made in the bone marrow, so platelets just simply aren't being formed to begin with, or we have an increased breakdown of those platelets outside of the marrow. This can be caused by leukemia or drugs, and some of the symptoms would include excessive bleeding. If you're not able to form those platelets, you're going to see excessive bleeding for any small damage to blood vessels. Thromboembolism is when a thrombus or a stationary clot can form, and it might actually travel at which point it will be called an embolism, and it could plug up another vessel. So we could have a disorder where we have too few clotting factors, or we actually have too many, and we start forming clots inside of blood vessels where they are not needed. Hemophilia is a genetic deficiency of clotting factor, meaning that your body has a mutation in a particular gene, and so the protein clotting factor is not going to form correctly. This prevents you from being able to form clots entirely. You have all the elements there, you have platelets, but since you cannot form clotting factor, you can't call that into existence. It's basically like you don't have the switch to turn on you don't have the switch to turn on the clot formation. So we'll talk about hemophilia a little bit later on in the semester when we start talking about genetic disorders. All right, so from this section, you should be able to list the components of blood that are involved in the formation of a blood clot, describe some of the stages of blood clotting, and summarize just a few of those blood clotting disorders that we talked about.